Okay, let's dive in. Imagine this. You're living thousands of years back. Someone in your community, maybe they've got this absolutely killer headache or they took a really bad hit to the head.
Right.
And the solution, actually drilling a hole right into their
It
skulls.
sounds completely wild, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But the thing is, this wasn't some, one-off desperate measure. This was trepanation or trepanation. You hear different names.
Uh-huh.
And it's the oldest surgical procedure known to humanity. Seriously ancient.
And incredibly widespread, too. That's
Yeah.
what's so fascinating. Practiced by so many different cultures
Yeah.
across literally thousands of years. It's one of the most, well, frankly, astonishing medical practices in history.
So that's what we're digging into today. You've given us this amazing pile of sources. We've got archaeological finds, ancient medical texts, even some pretty surprising modern accounts.
Yeah, the range is incredible. And our mission really is to unpack all of that, try to figure out the motivations behind it, those crazy survival rates, and how this ancient practice still kind of echoes today, in medicine and even pop culture.
There are definitely some aha moments coming up, I think. This whole journey into cranial surgery, it's just full of surprises.
And to really set the scene, you have to grasp the sheer disbelief back in the 19th century, Western medical times, right?
Oh, yeah.
When that first trip-end Inca skull showed up, they just couldn't wrap their heads around it. They thought, how could these primitive people possibly do this, let alone have the person actually survive it?
Their skepticism was huge, and partly based on their own grim experiences, wasn't it?
Exactly. Their own surgical survival rates were terrible back then, so the idea seemed impossible. But, as we'll see, they were profoundly wrong.
Okay, so let's start right there. Mid-19th century, this dramatic moment.
Right, 1865. You've got Ephraim George Squire. He's an American explorer, a diplomat, down in Peru. And he gets this very unusual skull from a well-known collector in Cusco, Senor Zentino.
And what makes it so unusual?
There's this perfectly cut, neat, half-inch square hole in it. And Squire, he looks at it and thinks, hang on, this isn't just an injury. He's convinced it's deliberate surgery.
And crucially, that the person lived afterwards.
That's the key part. So he brings it back to New York, shows it to the medical community, and the reaction, total disbelief, like we said.
And it wasn't just prejudice, though that was probably there.
No, it was grounded in their reality.
Oh.
I mean, think about it. In the best hospitals in Europe and America then, surviving tracing, maybe 10% chance if you were lucky.
Because of infection.
Rampant, deadly infections. They only even tried it in the most desperate cases. So ancient people with supposedly basic tools, no concept of germs, successfully doing this, it seemed absolutely ludicrous to them.
Totally upside down. But Squire, he didn't give up.
Nope. He takes the skull to Europe, to Paul Broca. Big name! Famous for Broca's area in the brain, the Speak Center, the top skull guy around.
And Broca?
Broca examines it meticulously, consults his surgical buddies, and he confirms it. Yes, it's trepanation, and yes, the patient definitely survived for quite a while after. Clear signs of healing.
But even with Broca backing it, the skepticism didn't just vanish, did it?
Not at all. He presents it in Paris, 1876.
Yeah.
Still meets that same doubt. Indians doing successful surgery.
Yeah.
Still hard for them to swallow.
Okay, but then things really shift.
Oh, massively. Just 7 years later, a discovery in central France. And this just blows the whole thing wide open.
What did they find?
Neolithic grave sites full of skulls. And many of them have these 2 to 3 inch wide, roundish holes. Clearly artificial.
Wow. And the proof of survival.
Undeniable. Clear scar tissue, bone regrowth, right around the edges of the holes on many of them. These people lived, sometimes for years after the surgery. They even found the little discs of bone that were removed. Some had little holes drilled in them, maybe worn as amulets or something.
So wait, you're saying Stone Age surgeons potentially had better results than Victorian doctors in top hospitals?
It sounds crazy, but based on the evidence of survival, yeah, that's what it points to. It completely flips our assumptions.
And this wasn't just a French thing, right? You said it was widespread.
Absolutely global.
Yeah.
Trepan skulls pop up everywhere. From the late Paleolithic, we're talking like 10,000 years ago, maybe even more, right up to this century in some traditional communities. It crossed cultures, continents, millennia.
And those survival rates.
Astonishing. Estimates often put ancient survival rates between 50 and, get this, 90%, usually towards the higher end.
Compared to 10% in the 1800s.
Exactly. It makes you seriously rethink what primitive means, doesn't it? Maybe they had some intuitive grasp of cleanliness, or maybe just living in less crowded, less germ-filled environments than those early hospitals helped.
It's mind-boggling. So, okay, they survived. How on earth did they do it with the tools they had?
Well, archaeologists have figured out there were basically 5 main techniques they used, varying by time and place.
Okay, let's break those down.
First up, the method used on that squire skull from Peru, rectangular intersecting cuts. Imagine using super sharp tools, obsidian, flint, later maybe metal knives.
Like the Peruvian tombie, that curved knife.
Exactly like the Toomey, perfect for the job. So much so, it's actually the emblem of the Peruvian Academy of Surgery now. You see this technique in Peru, but also France, Israel, parts of Africa.
Okay, method 1, what's next?
Number 2 is scraping. This was super common, especially way back in prehistory. You take a sharp flint, maybe obsidian, and just patiently scrape away the bone layer by layer.
Broca actually tried that himself, didn't he?
He did. Reproduced it using a piece of glass on a thick skull. Took him about 50 minutes. It sounds slow, but it was effective and relatively safe. Less risk of going too deep, perhaps. It even hung around into Renaissance Italy.
Method 3.
Circular grooving. Basically, cutting a circle-shaped trench or groove, then carefully prying or lifting out the disc of bone inside the circle. Also pretty common. Seen recently in places like Kenya.
Okay, now things get a bit more sophisticated, right?
Yeah, method 4 is the circular trephine or crown saw. Hippocrates, the famous Greek doctor, described using something like this. And by the time of Celsus, a Roman medical writer in the 1st century CE, it had evolved. It even had a retractable center pin to keep it steady.
Almost like modern ones.
Very much so. It's amazing how similar the basic design is. That central pin idea was key.
And the last method.
Number 5, drilling a circle of small, closely spaced holes, and then cutting or chiseling the bone between them to remove the whole section. Celsus recommended this one too. It got picked up by Arab physicians, became standard in the Middle Ages. You even saw versions of it used more recently in Peru and North Africa.
Kind of like making perforations to tear something out.
Exactly. And it's actually similar in principle to how surgeons create a modern osteoplastic flap, sometimes using a jiggly saw, which is like a flexible wire saw for bone.
Fascinating how these techniques developed. Now you hear trepan and trephine. Are they the same thing?
Nowadays, yeah, we use them interchangeably. But historically, they had different roots. Trepanation is Greek for borer. That's the older current. That seems to come later, maybe 16th or 17th century,
Right.
possibly from the Latin trefens, meaning 3 ends, describing a triangular-shaped instrument. Inventors like Fabricius ab Aquapendente or John Woodall are sometimes credited. It shows there was this burst of invention, especially in the Renaissance, refining the tools. Eventually, trophine just became another word for trepan.
Right. So we know how they did it, broadly speaking. But the massive question remains, why? Why drill holes in heads?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm.
And it's tricky because so many of these skulls come from cultures without writing.
Yeah.
So figuring out their exact reasons, it's tough.
But we have clues from later periods or other sources.
We do. We have written records from Western medicine starting around the 5th century BCE with the Greeks. And we also have studies of more recent traditional non-Western practices where trepanation continued.
Okay, let's start with the Greeks. Hippocrates.
Right. The Hippocratic texts, specifically one called On Wounds in the Head, give us the earliest detailed descriptions. And what's surprising is they didn't primarily recommend it for really bad, depressed skull fractures.
Which seems like the most obvious reason.
Exactly. Instead, they often used it for what seemed like less severe head injuries, maybe even without much bruising. The tool was, like we said, similar to a modern trephine, turned by hand or with a bow drill.
And they had specific instructions.
Oh yes. Go slow. Be super careful not to pierce the dura mater, that membrane covering the brain. Cool the instrument in cold water, probably to stop it overheating the bone. Check the depth with a probe. Avoid the skull sutures, the lines where the bones meet.
Why did they think it worked? What was the theory?
Their idea was all about stagnant blood. Like stagnant water, they thought trapped blood under the skull could go bad, basically decay into pus. Trephining was seen as a way to let this bad blood out before it spoiled.
So if the skull was already broken open, like in a depressed fracture.
They figured the blood already had a way out, so no need to drill another hole. Makes a certain kind of sense, right?
Yeah, following their logic. And later, with Galen.
Galen, the influential Roman physician in the 2nd century CE, he kind of solidified its use for star fractures to relieve pressure, remove bone splinters threatening the brain lining, allow drainage. He was quite experimental too, even suggesting doctors practice on Barbary apes, which were actually monkeys, and did studies on pressure inside the skull.
Okay, let's jump across the world. Ancient China. There's a famous story, isn't there?
Yes, from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. that huge historical novel. It tells of Huatuo, a legendary physician, and the powerful warlord Cao Cao. Cao Cao has terrible headaches.
And what to suggests?
He proposes opening Cao Cao's skull, trepanation essentially, to remove what he calls trapped air and fluids.
How did Cao Cao take that?
Badly. He basically accused Huatuo of trying to assassinate him, threw him in prison where Huatuo died, and supposedly his medical writings were lost. For ages, this story was taken as proof that trepanation wasn't really a thing in China, or at least faced huge resistance.
But that's changed recently.
And dramatically. Since about 2007, archaeological digs have turned up clear evidence contradicting that old idea. They found skulls from the Neolithic right through the Bronze and Iron Ages with definite trepanation holes.
Like actual proof.
Oh yeah. There's a 5,000-year-old male skull, M382, showing scraping marks and really good healing, and a 3,600-year-old mummy from the Shaohe tomb. A woman, her skull clearly shows trepanation, and she survived it.
So it was practiced there, maybe just not talked about in the same way.
Possibly. Or perhaps it was linked more to specific groups or beliefs. Some finds suggest connections to shamans, maybe ideas about balancing that vital life energy or even communicating with spirits. So a different cultural lens on it.
Okay, back to the West. Renaissance through the 19th century. Trepanation was still happening.
Very much so. Widely used for head wounds, depressed fractures, penetrating injuries. But, and this is a big but, mortality rates were often terrifyingly high, especially if the dura got punctured. Led to endless debates. When should we do it? Is it worth the risk?
And that older idea, the Hippocratic one, of doing it even without a fracture.
That prophylactic trepanation actually lingered. You mentioned Cornish miners in the 1800s insisting on it after bumps to the head. They clearly believed it prevented worse problems down the line.
But the danger was real. There's that quote about the surgeon needing his own head examined.
Exactly. Sir Astley Cooper, 1839. He said a surgeon doing it unnecessarily ought to be trephined in turn. It shows how risky it was perceived to be. And remember, moving surgery into hospitals initially made things worse because of infections.
Right. That context explains the 19th century disbelief about ancient success rates.
Precisely. It wasn't until the late 19th century, with Lister, Pasteur, the understanding of germs, antisepsis, and a better grasp of intracranial pressure, that trepanation, or craniotomy as we'd start calling it, became much safer and routine again.
And today, modern neurosurgery.
It's still fundamental. But it's not usually the treatment itself, it's the access point. For diagnosis, relieving pressure from blood clots, hematomas, cleaning up wounds, debridement, or getting instruments into the brain, like for biopsies or deep brain stimulation.
Okay, so beyond physical injury, what about things like epilepsy or mental illness? Was it used for those?
There's a long kind of unsettling history there, too, going back as far as Aretius the Cappadocian, around 150 CE, suggesting it for epilepsy. And incredibly, that idea persisted right into the 18th century.
Why epilepsy?
The thinking, captured in a 13th century text, was basically that the humors in air may go out and evaporate, letting bad stuff out of the head.
And mental illness.
Roger of Parma, around 1170, thought it could help with mania or melancholy, again, to let noxious material exhale. Later physicians like Robert Burton, in his famous Anatomy of Melancholy, and the physician Thomas Willis, also floated the idea.
You even see it in art, don't you? That Bosch painting.
The Cure for Folly, yes, showing the surgeon supposedly removing stones of folly from the patient's head. It reflects this idea that mental problems were physical things that could somehow be surgically removed. Other artists depicted similar scenes.
When did that fall out of favor?
Mostly by the 18th century. Reputable surgeons started abandoning it for psychiatric issues or simple headaches if there was no sign of physical injury. The thinking shifted. By the 19th century, it was pretty much only considered for epilepsy if it was clearly linked to a past head trauma.
Let's shift again to Africa. We have evidence there, too.
Definitely. Herodotus mentioned Libyans cauterizing kids' heads ages ago. Tripin skulls found among Tuareg nomads. But some of the best recent info comes from the Kisi people in Kenya, studied extensively by a researcher named Margetts in the 20th century.
And why did the Kisi practice it?
Primarily for headaches following a head injury. Very specifically not for things like psychosis, general epilepsy, dizziness, or spirit possession. Though Margetts notes other groups did cite releasing spirits for bad headaches.
How did they do it?
Scraping. Using a sharp knife. It took a few hours, no anesthetic, but they used restraint.
And the outcome?
Margetts' reported mortality was low, perhaps 5%, which is remarkable. And apparently both the practitioners and the patients were generally satisfied with the results. It seemed to work for what they used it for.
5%. That's incredible. Now, Peru, you said it has the most trepan skulls anywhere.
By far. And the connection seems really strong with injuries from warfare. They used clubs, slingshots, lots of potential for skull fractures.
So more practical than ritualistic there.
The leading theory, put forward by anthropologist John Verano, suggests it probably started pragmatically, cleaning wounds, picking out broken bone fragments after someone got hit. Then they noticed, hey, the people we do this for seem to survive more often.
So they learned from experience.
Exactly. The evidence overwhelmingly points towards treating serious head trauma, rather than it being primarily ritual, although ritual elements could certainly have been incorporated.
Now, you mentioned this persistent myth about headaches being the main reason. Where did that come from?
It's a really common misunderstanding. It seems to trace back mainly to Sir William Osler, a very famous physician writing in 1913. He kind of misinterpreted earlier ideas from Paul Broca.
What had Broca actually suggested?
Broca, back in the 1870s, was looking at trepan skulls of children who didn't have fractures. He speculated maybe it was ritual, religious, maybe releasing confined demons, or perhaps treating convulsions like febrile seizures in kids. He never mentioned simple headaches as a primary driver.
So Osler added the headache part.
Osler seems to have conflated Broca's ideas and added headache and infantile convulsions, making it sound more like treating common ailments. It made the whole practice seem more relatable, perhaps, to armchair anthropologists trying to link ancient practices to everyday conditions.
But the evidence just isn't there for headaches being the main driver.
Not really, no. Especially considering how many trepan skulls belong to children who suffer far less from chronic headaches or migraines than adults do.
Huh.
But once that idea got out there, it just stuck.
So, summing up the why, it's complicated.
Incredibly varied. You've got supernatural beliefs getting rid of evil spirits, you've got ritual rites of passage marking warriors, and you've definitely got therapeutic aims treating tumors, seizures, epilepsy, maybe migraines sometimes, loss of consciousness, behavioral changes, and obviously trauma.
And the idea of pressure.
Yeah, if you have a blinding headache that feels like intense pressure inside your skull, the idea that making a hole might relieve it. Well, it's not necessarily illogical or purely magical thinking, is it? It follows a certain physical intuition.
And those bone discs they removed, sometimes worn as charms.
Yes, found in Neolithic sites, Africa, Europe, believed to offer protection. And in Peru, some theories suggest trepanation might have been thought to allow a person's spirit to re-enter the body if it was lost due to trauma, causing things like paralysis or depression. Very different ways of understanding the body and spirit.
Okay, let's bring it up to the present day. How does ancient trepanation relate to modern neurosurgery?
Well, it's absolutely the precursor. Modern craniotomy owes its existence to this ancient practice. But there's a huge difference.
We do.
In a modern craniotomy, the piece of bone they remove the bone flap is almost always put back in place as soon as possible to heal. Ancient trepanation usually created a permanent hole.
And why do surgeons perform craniotomies today?
For very specific, serious reasons, usually confirmed by scans first. Things like removing brain tumors, fixing aneurysms, those dangerous weak spots in blood vessels, draining those blood clots, hematomas that put pressure on the brain, or sometimes monitoring pressure inside the skull.
And the tools are way more advanced now.
Oh, absolutely. Modern cranial drills are incredibly precise, offered with diamond-coated tips and crucial safety features to stop them accidentally going too deep and damaging the brain or its lining. Combine that with sterile conditions, antibiotics. It's a world away from scraping with flint.
Even so, those recent survival rates from traditional practices in Africa and Oceania were still remarkably high, weren't they? Around 90%.
They were indeed, which again suggests that in the right context, maybe without the hospital-acquired infections of the 19th century, the basic procedure wasn't inherently as lethal as it later became in the West for a time.
But now, this is where it gets really strange. It's not just surgeons doing this anymore.
No, and this is the highly controversial part. There's been this fringe movement promoting voluntary or even DIY trepanation, groups like the International Trepanation Advocacy Group.
DIY trepanation? Seriously, what's their argument?
It's unconventional.
Yeah.
They claim that when our skull bones fuse completely in childhood, it somehow inhibits brain pulsations. And this leads to losing dreams, imagination, intense perceptions. They think drilling a small hole restores some kind of intracranial pulse pressure.
Leading to?
They claim it increases blood flow to the brain, speeds up brain metabolism, makes you more original, creative, boosts testosterone. A whole list of supposed benefits.
And they justify this how?
often by pointing back to the ancient practices, saying, look, people did this for thousands of years all over the world. There must be something to it.
Are there actual examples of people doing this to themselves?
Unfortunately, yes. Probably the most famous is Amanda Fielding, a British artist. She performed it on herself back in 1970. Filmed it, too. Believed it improved blood flow, prevented aging effects on the brain. She even ran for parliament twice trying to get the NHS to offer it.
Wow. Anyone else?
There was Bart Hughes, a Dutch librarian, back in 1965. Drilled his own head. Claimed it increased brain blood volume and restored a kind of childlike consciousness.
And wasn't there a connection to the Beatles?
The story goes that John Lennon was fascinated by Hughes' ideas and supposedly tried to convince Paul McCartney to get Trepan too.
Oh.
Unsuccessfully, thankfully.
And even more recently.
Just last year, 2023, a Russian researcher, Michael Raduga, who studies lucid dreaming, he performed neurosurgery on himself, including trepanation, implanted electrodes, and tried electrical stimulation, all in an attempt to influence his brain during lucid dreams. Highly dangerous stuff.
It sounds incredibly risky. Has this idea shown up elsewhere?
Yeah, it pops up in popular culture sometimes. There was an episode of the TV show ER back in 1998 featuring a character doing it. And it's depicted, albeit historically, in the movie Master and Commander.
But what do actual neurosurgeons say?
They're horrified, basically. Lawrence Watkins, a top surgeon, put it bluntly. In a surgeon's hands, making a hole in the head isn't that risky today, but for someone doing it themselves, the risks are huge. Infection, obviously. Direct brain damage, hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding, and potentially death, especially if you accidentally penetrate the duramater, that protective layer. The medical community has issued warnings. The British Medical Journal did back in 2000 because they saw rising interest online websites promoting it for depression, chronic fatigue, stress, with videos, even merchandise.
And the consensus today?
Overwhelmingly, that non-medical trepanation is incredibly dangerous and unsupported by evidence. Medical News Today summed it up. Trepanation is best left to the medical history books.
So when we look back at this whole long, strange history, what's a takeaway?
It's a fascinating window into how humans have tried to understand and fix what goes wrong, isn't it? Trepanation seems like this bizarre, maybe superstitious practice, especially when there wasn't an obvious fracture.
But maybe it wasn't just magic.
Perhaps not entirely. It might have been what we call an empirical approach, learned through trial and error. Like we said, a headache feels like pressure, maybe a hole helps. That's not totally illogical. And we know bleeding can occur under the skull after injury, causing pressure. Tree finding could, in some cases, accidentally relieve that.
And those ancient survival rates suggest it wasn't always catastrophic.
Exactly. At least not until surgery moved into those infection-ridden early hospitals. For much of its history, it seems to have often met that basic medical principle. First, do no harm. Or at least the perceived benefits outweigh the risks in their view.
And the tools definitely evolved.
Hugely. From sharp stones and metal knives to incredibly precise, safe modern drills. A massive technological leap based on the same fundamental idea of accessing the skull.
Is there any legacy in other modern procedures?
There is, actually, in an indirect way. Think about the basic idea. Making a small hole to get through bone. That concept evolved into tools like the needles used for bone marrow biopsies today.
To diagnose things like leukemia.
Exactly. Anemia, leukemia, lymphoma, even some infections like TB. Doctors use a specialized needle to make a small hole, usually in the hip bone, to extract marrow for testing. So that core idea of controlled bone access, pioneered for the skull, found new applications.
It all came together at that big conference too, didn't it?
Yeah, the International Colloquium on Cranial Trepanation back in 2000. Experts gathered confirmed just how global and ancient this practice was and showcased the amazing variety of tools and techniques used across millennia.
So wrapping it all up, what really stands out to you about this whole story?
For me, it's the sheer human ingenuity, maybe desperation sometimes, but also the empirical observation that must have occurred. How practices that seem barbaric to us might have had logical underpinnings in their time and surprisingly good outcomes.
And it makes you think about how far we've come, from drilling based on observation to precision surgery guided by MRI scans.
Absolutely. But here's a final thought to leave you with. Even with all our modern science, all our understanding of the brain, why does this ancient, risky practice still hold an allure for some people today, outside of medicine? For reasons of self-improvement or enlightenment.
People performing DIY trepanation.
Exactly. What does that enduring, almost mystical appeal tell us about our constant human quest to understand ourselves, to push boundaries, maybe even to find shortcuts to altered states, even when it involves facing incredible danger? Something to ponder.